You know, we spend our entire lives building. I spent decades working, saving every penny, until I finally had $450,000 tucked away for Martha and me. But when my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, David, ran into serious financial trouble, I found myself gripping that money so tight it actually hurt. My lawyer, Mr. Miller, gave me all the legal advice I could ever ask for, but my heart was still a mess. I finally realized that until I put my pride and my bank account on the altar, I would never find true peace. But before I tell you the exact moment, everything changed, and how that holy fire started to heal the broken pieces of my home, I have a quick question for you. Which beautiful part of the country are you listening to today? Please, take a second to leave a comment with your city or state. I truly love knowing who is joining me on this porch today. Note: while this story is a narrative illustration created to make these truths easier to understand, the spiritual lessons and the transformation they offer are very real. You know, as I sit here on this porch, watching the sun dip behind those old oak trees, I find myself thinking about the hardest place I have ever been. It was not a hospital room, and it was not a funeral home. It was a place that most of us try to avoid, even if we have spent our whole lives sitting in a church pew. I am talking about the altar. In our modern world, when we hear the word altar, we think of a beautiful piece of furniture. We think of carved oak or polished marble standing at the front of a sanctuary. We see the flowers, and we see the velvet cushions. But in the ancient world, the altar was a very different thing. It was a place of slaughter. It was a place where something valuable was given up, so that something eternal could be gained. For me, the altar was not in a building. It was a spiritual position of total, absolute surrender. And let me tell you, it was the most uncomfortable place I have ever stood. Why? Because we love to talk about the crown. We love to talk about the throne. And we love to talk about the blessings. We want the peace of mind that comes with a successful life. We want to see our children prosper. We want to know that our $450,000 in savings, all those years of sweat and toil, will keep us safe. But here is the truth that I had to learn the hard way. Before there is ever a throne, there is always an altar. My lawyer, Mr. Miller, kept telling me to protect what was mine. He talked about walls, and he talked about legal structures. And my wife, Martha, she just wanted peace in our family, but I was stuck. I was stuck because I was trying to reach for the blessing without ever passing through the sacrifice. The altar is where your will goes to die, so that the life of God can begin. That is a heavy thought, is it not? It is uncomfortable because it demands that we stop being the kings and queens of our own little worlds. It demands that we empty our hands. I remember looking at my bank statements, seeing that balance of $450,000, and feeling like that money was my life. I thought it gave me the right to control how Sarah and David lived. I thought it gave me the right to be the boss. But the altar whispered a different story. It told me that God cannot fill what has not been emptied, and he cannot resurrect what has not first died. Until I was willing to walk into that uncomfortable place, until I was willing to lay down my right to be in control, I was just a man with a lot of money and a very heavy heart. The altar is the only place where the old you fades away, so the new you can finally breathe. It is the doorway, and though it is narrow, it is the only way to find the life you were actually meant to live. You know, when we talk about the altar today, we often use very soft language. We talk about it as a place of prayer or a place of peace. But if we were to step back in time, thousands of years ago, to the ancient world, the word altar would bring a very different image to your mind. It would not be an image of comfort. It would be an image of cost. It would be an image of sacrifice. It would be, quite frankly, a place of slaughter. I have spent a lot of time sitting in my armchair lately, thinking about that word. Slaughter. It is a harsh word. It is a bloody word. It is a word that means something has to die. In the old days, a person did not bring their leftovers to the altar. They did not bring what they did not want. They brought their very best. They brought a lamb or a bull, something that represented their livelihood, their wealth, and their future. And when that gift was placed on those stones, it was not just sitting there. It was killed. Its life was poured out. Why? Why would anyone do something so drastic? Because they understood a deep, spiritual law. They understood that to gain something eternal, you must be willing to give up something valuable. They understood that the altar was a place of total transfer. Once that sacrifice was made, that animal no longer belonged to the farmer. It belonged entirely to God. I find myself reflecting on this as I look at my own life. We like to think we are beyond those ancient rituals. But the truth is, our hearts are still looking for altars. Only today, our sacrifices are different. We do not bring lambs. We bring our dreams. We bring our reputations. We bring our need to be right, and our need to be in charge. But here is the thing about slaughter. It is permanent. You cannot take back a life once it has been offered. In my own journey, I realized that I had been trying to make deals with God. I wanted to give him a little bit of my time, maybe a little bit of my attention, but I did not want any slaughter. I did not want anything to actually die. I wanted to keep my old habits. I wanted to keep my old way of thinking. I wanted to keep my pride. But the fire of God does not fall on an empty altar. The fire only comes when there is a sacrifice. I remember talking to Martha about this. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and the house was so quiet. I told her, "Martha, I think I have been holding on to too much. I think I have been trying to live my life, and then asking God to just bless my plans. But that is not how the altar works. The altar is not a place where we ask God to help us do what we want. It is the place where what we want dies. It is the place where our will is surrendered." Think about that for a moment. Think about the things you hold most dear. Maybe it is your reputation in this town. Maybe it is the way people look up to you. Maybe it is the control you have over your family. To put those things on the altar, to let them be slaughtered, feels like losing everything. It feels like a death. And that is exactly what it is. But we must remember that in God's kingdom, death is always the doorway to life. The seed must fall into the ground and die before it can grow into a harvest. The slaughter at the altar is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of liberation. When you finally let that thing die, it can no longer control you. It can no longer weigh you down. I used to be so afraid of the fire. I was afraid that if I gave everything to God, there would be nothing left of me. But I am learning that the only things the fire burns away are the things that were holding me back anyway. It burns away the wood, the hay, and the stubble of my character. It leaves behind the gold. So, I ask you today, what is on your altar? Is it something truly valuable? Or are you just giving God your spare change? Are you willing to experience the slaughter of your own ego so that you can finally know the power of his resurrection? It is a heavy question, I know, but it is the only question that leads to real life. Let me get a bit more personal with you. It is one thing to talk about ancient altars and lambs, but it is another thing entirely when the sacrifice is sitting in your bank account. For me, that sacrifice had a specific number, $450,000. Now, to some people, that might seem like a huge fortune. To others, maybe not so much. But to Martha and me, that was our life. That was every extra shift I worked. That was every vacation we did not take. That was 35 years of saving and planning and worrying. That $450,000 was my safety net. It was my proof that I had succeeded as a man and as a provider. But lately, that money had started to feel less like a blessing and more like a cage. You see, our daughter, Sarah, and her husband, David, had been going through a really rough patch. David is a good man, he really is, but he had some bad luck with a business venture. They were struggling. They were behind on their mortgage, and I could see the stress in Sarah's eyes every time she came over for Sunday dinner. As a father, I wanted to help, but there was a part of me, a dark, selfish part, that wanted to use that money to control them. I found myself thinking, well, if I give them the money, then David has to listen to my advice. If I bail them out, then Sarah has to do things my way. I was using my $450,000 as a scepter to rule over my children. I remember one afternoon, I was in my home office, staring at the bank statement. I was clutching that piece of paper so tight, my knuckles were turning white. I was thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I need this money for a nursing home? What if the market crashes? What if David just wastes it again? The grip I had on that money was a physical manifestation of the grip I had on my life. I was not trusting God. I was trusting the $450,000. Martha came into the room, and she could see the tension in my shoulders. She sat down and said, "Honey, you are holding on to that so tight that you are losing your peace." And she was right. I was miserable. I was angry at David for being in debt. I was frustrated with Sarah for not being more careful. But mostly, I was terrified of losing my security. I went to see my lawyer, Mr. Miller. I wanted to know how I could set up a trust that would give them money, but only under my very strict conditions. I wanted walls. I wanted rules. Mr. Miller, and he is a professional. He just looked at me through his glasses and said, "You can certainly do that, but you cannot control their hearts with a legal document." That night, I could not sleep. I felt like I was in a wrestling match. On one side was my fear, telling me to hold on, to protect the $450,000 at all costs. On the other side was a quiet voice, telling me to go to the altar. The altar meant surrender. It meant letting go of the control. It meant realizing that the money was never really mine to begin with. It was a gift, and I was just a steward. But my ego did not want to be a steward. My ego wanted to be the owner. I realized that my grip on that money was actually a grip on my own pride. I was afraid that if I did not have that balance in the bank, I would not be important anymore. I would just be an old man with nothing to offer. This is the struggle of the living sacrifice that the Bible talks about. We want to be on the altar, but we also want to keep our bank accounts in our pockets. We want to give our lives to God, but we want to keep the keys to the house. I had to ask myself, do I trust God more than I trust $450,000? It sounds like an easy question, but when it is your life savings, it is the hardest question in the world. I was realizing that my safety was an illusion. My security was a lie. True security does not come from what you possess. It comes from who possesses you. I looked at Martha the next morning, and I told her, "I think I have been making an idol out of our savings. I have been using it to play God in Sarah's life, and it is killing my spirit." I was finally starting to understand that the altar was calling for that $450,000. Not because God needs my money. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, but because he wanted my heart, and he could not have my heart as long as it was locked inside a safe. I had to choose. I had to decide if I was willing to let that grip go and find out what happens when you finally stop trying to save yourself. I remember the morning I drove down to the city to meet with my lawyer, Mr. Miller. It was one of those crisp, grey October mornings in Connecticut, the kind where you can feel the winter coming in your bones. I had been losing sleep for weeks, tossing and turning beside Martha, thinking about those $450,000. Mr. Miller's office was exactly what you would expect from a man who has spent 40 years handling estates and wills. It smelled like old paper, leather-bound books, and stale coffee. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, peering at me through those thick, gold-rimmed spectacles. I had come there for one reason. I wanted to build a wall. I told him, "Mr. Miller, I want to make sure my money is safe. I want to help my daughter, Sarah, but I do not want David to have any control over it. I want conditions. I want rules. I want to make sure that if I give them a single cent of those $450,000, they have to do exactly what I say." Mr. Miller leaned back in his chair, and the leather creaked. He started talking about trusts and asset protection and legal barriers. He spoke about how we could tie up the money so tight that Sarah and David would have to jump through hoops just to pay their mortgage. He called it protection. He called it prudence. But as he was talking, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. I looked at the tall stacks of files on his desk. Hundreds of people just like me, all trying to protect their piles of gold from the people they supposed to love. I realized that what Mr. Miller was helping me build was not a safety net. It was a fortress. And the problem with a fortress is that while it keeps the danger out, it also keeps the love out. It keeps the peace out. I asked him, "Mr. Miller, do these legal walls ever actually fix a family?" He paused. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with a tired kind of kindness and said, "Well, in 40 years, I have seen people protect their money, but I have also seen them lose their children in the process." I walked out of that office and stood on the sidewalk for a long time. I had the legal documents in my briefcase. I had the power to control the $450,000. I had the wall, but as I looked at my reflection in the glass door, I did not see a powerful man. I saw a lonely, scared man. I was trying to use the law to do what only grace can do. I was trying to protect my life by building a wall of paper and ink. I realized that my legal wall was actually an altar that I had built to my own fear. I was worshipping my security more than I was worshipping my Creator. The struggle in our senior years is often this. We feel like we are running out of time, so we try to control everything we have left. We think that if we can just lock down the bank account and lock down the inheritance, then we will be safe. But the more walls we build, the smaller our world becomes. I got back into my car and sat there in the silence. I looked at that briefcase on the passenger seat. Inside were the plans to protect $450,000. But inside my heart, there was a growing realization that I could not follow Jesus and keep my walls at the same time. I could not be a person of faith while living in a fortress of fear. The altar does not want your legal documents. The altar does not want your cleverly worded trusts. The altar wants your trust. Absolute trust. It was becoming clear to me that I had a choice to make. I could stay behind my legal wall, or I can walk out into the open air of God's providence. One was safe but suffocating. The other was terrifying but true. When I finally got home that evening, Martha was in the kitchen, humming a hymn while she fixed a pot of tea. She didn't ask me what Mr. Miller had said. She just looked at me. And I think she knew. She saw the weight I was carrying. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I began to think about a truth that I had heard many times in church, but I had never really felt in my gut. It is what I call the emptying principle. It is a very simple law of the spiritual life, but it is the hardest one to practice. The law is this: God cannot fill what is already full. Think about that. If your hands are tightly clenched around your life, around your $450,000, around your reputation, or your plans for your children, then your hands are full. There is no room for anything else. Even if God wanted to pour out a new blessing, even if He wanted to give you a peace that passes all understanding, He couldn't, because there is no space. I looked at my own hands, resting there on the tablecloth. My fingers were stiff. My palms were sweaty. I had been holding on to my life so tightly for so long that I didn't even know how to open it anymore. This is the great paradox of the altar. We think that if we empty ourselves, we will be left with nothing. We think that if I let go of the control over Sarah and David, then our relationship will just disappear. We think that if I stop obsessing over those $450,000, then we will end up on the street. But the emptying principle tells us something different. It tells us that the emptying is the only way to get to the filling. I thought about the relationship I had with my daughter. It was strained. It was cold. Every time we spoke, there was this unspoken tension about the money. I was full of judgment, and she was full of resentment. Our relationship was full, but it was full of the wrong things. It was full of ego. It was full of I am right, and you are wrong. Before God could resurrect my relationship with my daughter, that old, controlling relationship had to die. It had to be emptied. I realized that I had to go to the altar, not to ask God to fix Sarah, but to ask God to empty me. I had to say, Lord, I am bringing you my hands. They are full of fear. They are full of $450,000 that I have turned into an idol. They are full of my own pride as a father who thinks he knows best. I began to understand that the altar is a place of the great exchange. But the exchange can only happen if you are willing to let go first. You cannot grab the new thing until you drop the old thing. I remember talking to my pastor, a man who had walked through his own share of fires. He told me, "Friend, the reason we struggle so much is that we want the resurrection life without the burial. We want the garden to grow, but we don't want to put the seed in the dark, cold ground. But a seed is just a seed as long as you keep it in your pocket. It only becomes a harvest when you let it go, when you empty your pocket and put the seed in the dirt. To the seed, that feels like the end of the world. It is dark. It is lonely. It is the end of being a seed. But it is the only way to become a tree." I sat there at the table with Martha, and I finally realized that my life was just a collection of seeds that I was too afraid to plant. I was holding on to my seeds because I was afraid of the death that happens in the soil. The emptying principle is an invitation to freedom. It is the invitation to stop being the one who has to carry everything. When you empty your hands, you are finally free to reach out and touch the hand of God. I looked at Martha and I said, "Honey, I am done with the legal walls. I am done with the what-ifs. I am going to empty my hands. I don't know what it will look like, and I don't know how we will feel tomorrow. But I know that I cannot breathe as long as I am clutching this life so tight." It was the first time in months that I felt like I could actually take a deep breath. The emptying had begun. And while it felt like a kind of death, it also felt, for the first time, like the very beginning of life. I spent a lot of time in my study that week, sitting in the old leather chair that has seen better days. I had my Bible open to the early books, the ones we often skip over, because they seem so full of ancient rules and strange rituals. But as I read about the sacrifices in the Old Testament, something hit me like a ton of bricks. It was the concept of ownership. In those ancient times, when a man brought a lamb to the altar, he wasn't just making a gesture. He was performing a legal and spiritual transfer. The moment that lamb was placed on the altar, it was no longer his. He couldn't decide what happened to it next. He couldn't take it back home if he changed his mind. It belonged, entirely and forever, to God. I looked down at my desk, at the bank statement that showed $450,000, and I realized that I had been playing a game. I told myself that I had given this situation to God, but in my heart, I still acted like the owner. I still acted like the CEO of my family's future. Is ownership a heavy burden? Isn't it? When you own something, you are responsible for it. You have to protect it. You have to worry about it. You have to make sure it doesn't get wasted. I had been carrying the weight of those $450,000 on my shoulders for 35 years. I was exhausted from the ownership. I began to realize that the power of the altar is the power of the transfer. When you place your life, or your money, or your children on that altar, you are signing over the deed. You are saying, Lord, this is no longer mine. It is yours. I thought about Sarah and David. For years, I felt like I owned their success. I felt like they failed. It was a reflection on me. If David made a bad business deal, it was my problem to fix. But that is a lie. Sarah and David are not my property. They belong to God. Their journey, their struggles, and even their failures are in His hands, not mine. I remember walking out to the kitchen and seeing Martha. She was looking at some old photos of the kids. I sat down and said, Martha, I have been trying to be the owner of things that were never mine to begin with. I have been trying to make Sarah happy. I have been trying to own the $450,000 as if it were my life insurance for my soul. She looked at me with those wise, blue eyes and said, It is a lot of work to be the owner, isn't it? And she was right. It was exhausting. The moment I decided to transfer the ownership, everything changed. I realized that if God is the owner of the $450,000, then I don't have to stay awake at night worrying about the economy. If He is the owner, then He is responsible for how it is used. My only job is to be a faithful steward. There is a massive difference between an owner and a steward. An owner is stressed. A steward is at peace. An owner has to control the outcome. A steward just has to follow the instructions. I had to tell myself, over and over again, that I had moved those $450,000 from my ledger to God's ledger. I had to tell myself that Sarah and David were no longer under my jurisdiction. They were under His. It felt like a physical weight was being lifted off my chest. I felt lighter. I felt, for the first time, in a long time, like I could actually enjoy my life, because the pressure was off. When you transfer ownership at the altar, you are not losing your life. You are losing the burden of having to run your life. It is the greatest trade in the history of the world. You give God your limited, tired, stressed out ownership, and He gives you His infinite, peaceful, and perfect leadership. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. I said, Lord, I am officially signing over the deed. I am handing you the keys to the bank account, the keys to my children's future, and the keys to my own heart. I am no longer the owner. I am just a guest in your world. That was the night I finally slept through the night. No tossing, no turning, just the deep, quiet peace of a man who finally knows that he is not in charge. Now, here is where it gets tricky. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul uses a phrase that has always fascinated me. He calls us to be a living sacrifice. Have you ever thought about how strange that sounds? A sacrifice is supposed to be dead. In the old days, the lamb didn't get up and walk away. But we, you, and me, we are living. And the problem with a living sacrifice is that it keeps trying to crawl off the altar. I saw this so clearly in my own life. On Sunday morning, I would be in church, singing the hymns, feeling the Spirit move, and I would sincerely say, Lord, I give it all to you. I give you the $450,000. I give you my worry about David. I am yours. But then, Monday afternoon would roll around. I would get a phone call from Sarah, and she would sound stressed. Or I would see a headline about the stock market, and suddenly, I would feel myself crawling. My mind would start racing. I would start thinking, maybe I should call Mr. Miller again. Maybe I should take back control of those $450,000 just in case. Before I knew it, I wasn't a sacrifice anymore. I was back in the driver's seat. I had crawled off the altar and picked up my heavy bags of worry all over again. Is it a daily struggle? Isn't it? Especially for those of us who have spent 60 or 70 years being the ones in charge. We are used to fixing things. We are used to being the ones who have the answers. Our flesh, our old habits. They don't like the fire of the altar. The fire is uncomfortable. The fire is hot. And as soon as it starts to burn away our pride, we want to jump off. I remember one Tuesday, just a few days after I thought I had surrendered everything, I found myself looking at David, my son-in-law, and I was judging him. I was thinking about how he should have handled his business differently. I was mentally taking back the money I had decided to trust God with. I was literally trying to crawl back into the position of being the judge and the owner. I had to stop myself. I had to literally say out loud, "No, you are a sacrifice. You stay on the altar." Being a living sacrifice means that surrender is not a one-time event. It is a 1,000 times a day event. It means that every time the fear comes back, every time the need to control Sarah and David rises in your throat, you have to lie back down. You have to let the fire do its work. The fire of God is not there to destroy you. It is there to cleanse you. It is burning away the wood, the hay, and the stubble. It is burning away the old you that thinks it can save itself. I realized that the reason I wanted to crawl off the altar was that I didn't yet fully trust the fire. I thought the fire was my enemy. But I am learning that the fire is my friend. The fire is what makes me pure. The fire is what gives me power. If you feel powerless in your spiritual life today, if you feel like your prayers are just hitting the ceiling, it might be because you have crawled off the altar. You are asking for the fire of God's presence, but you aren't providing the fuel of your surrender. God doesn't send the fire to empty altars. He sends it to altars that are covered in sacrifice. I had to learn to stay still. I had to learn to trust God, even when it felt like I was losing my grip on everything I had worked for. I had to trust that the version of me that comes out of the fire will be 1,000 times better than the version of me that went in. Martha and I talk about this often now. When we feel the old anxiety rising, when we start to worry about the $450,000, we look at each other and say, "Get back on the altar." It is a quiet, daily discipline. It is the discipline of saying, "I am not my own. I have been bought with a price. I am a living sacrifice. And today, I will stay where I belong. I will let God be God, and I will be His." It is not easy, but it is the only way to live. The only way to find the life that is truly life is to stay on the altar until the old you is gone, and only the life of Christ remains. I want to be honest with you, really honest. It is easy to be a saint on Sunday morning. There is something about the atmosphere in a church, the smell of old hymnals, the light streaming through the stained glass, and the sound of voices lifting up those familiar songs we have known since we were children. I remember sitting there last Sunday, with Martha, right by my side, holding her hand. The pastor was talking about faith, about letting go, about trusting the shepherd through the dark valleys. As we sang, "I Surrender All," I felt a lump in my throat. I meant it. I really did. In that moment, standing there, in my Sunday best, the $450,000 in our retirement account felt like nothing. I felt like I could give it all away. I felt like I could trust God with Sarah, with David, and with every single one of our tomorrows. I felt like a hero of the faith. But then, Monday afternoon arrived. The weekend was over. The sun was setting a little lower in the sky, and the house was quiet. I was sitting at my desk, and the mail came. There was a letter, a simple, white envelope. It was not even for me. It was a bill that had accidentally been sent to our address, but it was in David's name. I saw the balance. I saw the past due stamp, in bright red ink. And just like that, All the peace from Sunday morning evaporated like mist in the heat. Suddenly, my heart started racing. My mind, that had been so full of hymns 24 hours ago, was now full of panic. I started thinking, what is David doing? Why is he so careless? If I do not step in, they are going to lose everything. My $450,000, my life's work, is going to be swallowed up by their mistakes. I found myself reaching for the telephone. I had Mr. Miller's office number memorized. I wanted to call him. I wanted to tell him, stop the papers. Do not release the funds. I want to put more strings on this money. I want to be the boss again. This is the Monday afternoon struggle. It is the gap between what we believe in the sanctuary and how we live in the kitchen. It is the gap between our spirit and our flesh. I sat there, staring at that telephone for what felt like an hour. My hand was literally hovering over the receiver. I was arguing with myself. One part of me said, "You are just being a good father. You are being prudent. You are protecting your family." But the other part of me, the part that stays on the altar, whispered a different truth. It said, "You are just afraid. You do not believe God is as capable on Monday as he was on Sunday." I realized that my urge to call Mr. Miller was a lack of faith disguised as wisdom. I was trying to crawl off the altar because the fire was starting to get real. It is one thing to surrender in a metaphor. It is another thing to surrender when you see a red past due stamp on a bill. I looked at my hand. My old, wrinkled hand, still hovering over that phone. I saw how much I still wanted to be the king of my own little world. I wanted to use those $450,000 to make David and Sarah do what I thought was best. I wanted to play God. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes. I had to go back to the altar, right there in my home office. I had to say, "Lord, I am sorry. I am a living sacrifice. And I am trying to crawl away again. Please, help me stay still." I did not call Mr. Miller. I put the bill in a drawer, and I walked out to the kitchen. Martha was there, making some coffee. She looked at me and asked, "Are you okay, dear? You look like you have been in a fight." I told her, I have been. I have been fighting myself. The Monday afternoon struggle is where real faith is built. It is not built in the easy moments. It is built in the moments when everything in you wants to take back the control, but you choose to keep your hands open instead. It is the hardest thing I have ever done. It is a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute choice to believe that God is who he says he is, even when the mail comes. So, if you are struggling today, if you are tempted to pick back up the burdens you laid down yesterday, do not be discouraged. You are just a living sacrifice, feeling the heat of the fire. Stay still. Do not reach for the phone. Do not take back the keys. Trust the one who invited you to the altar in the first place. He is there on Monday, just as much as he was on Sunday. I want to talk to you about the fire. In the ancient world, you could not have an altar without fire. Fire was the main element. And fire is a fascinating thing, isn't it? It does two things at the same time. It consumes and it cleanses. For a long time, I was afraid of the fire of God. I thought his fire was about punishment. I thought it was about God being angry with me because I was not perfect. But as I have spent more time at the altar, I have realized that his fire is actually his love. It is a holy fire that wants to burn away everything in me that is not real, everything that is not pure, and everything that is keeping me from being truly happy. When I finally decided to stop fighting for control over those $450,000, and when I decided to stop trying to manage Sarah and David's life, the fire began to fall. And let me tell you, it hurt. It did not hurt because God was being mean. It hurt because the fire was burning away my pride. I had a lot of pride. I had the pride of a self-made man. I had the pride of a provider who thought his money was his worth. I had the pride of a father who thought he was always right. The fire started to burn through those layers of wood, hay, and stubble in my character. I remember sitting by the fireplace in our living room one evening. I was watching the logs turn to ash. I realized that my motive for helping Sarah and David was not as pure as I thought. Underneath the help, there was a hidden motive. I wanted them to be beholden to me. I wanted them to need me. I wanted to be the hero of their story. The fire burned that away. It was painful to admit that I was being selfish. It was painful to see the wood of my ego turning to ash. But as that wood burned away, something else started to emerge. The fire of the altar is where you are refined. Just like a goldsmith puts gold into the furnace to get rid of the dross, God puts us into the fire of surrender to get rid of our hidden motives and our selfish ambitions. I started to notice a change in how I spoke to David. Before, my words were like little hooks, trying to pull him in the direction I wanted. I would say things like, "Well, if it were me, I would do this." But I was saying it with a spirit of judgment. After the fire started doing its work, those hooks were gone. I found myself just listening. I found myself actually praying for him, instead of just worrying about him. The fire was cleansing my heart. And here is the beautiful thing about the fire. It provides power. In the Bible, whenever a true sacrifice was laid on the altar, God responded with fire from heaven. But notice, the fire did not come to empty altars. It came to altars that were covered in sacrifice. If you feel powerless in your life today, if you feel like you are just going through the motions, it might be because you are asking for the fire without providing the fuel. The fuel is your surrender. The fuel is you being willing to let God burn away the old you. I realized that the reason I was so tired, so exhausted from the stress, was because I was carrying around so much rubbish. I was carrying around years of resentment, years of needing to be in control, and years of trusting in my $450,000 instead of trusting in God. The fire is the great purifier. It burns away the to-do lists we try to give to God. It burns away our rights. It burns away our comfort zones. And what is left? What is left when the fire is done? Only what is eternal. Only love. Only peace. Only a version of me that is finally, truly, free. I looked at Martha the other day, and she told me, "You look different. You look lighter." I told her, "I am. I have been through the fire. I am still in the fire, actually, but I am not afraid of it anymore. I am letting it burn away the hero in me so that the Son of God can live through me." So, my friend, do not fear the fire on your altar. Do not run from the heat. The heat is where the purity happens. The heat is where the power comes from. Let the holy fire consume your pride, your hidden motives, and your selfish plans. Let it burn until there is nothing left but the gold of a heart that is fully and purely His. I have spent many mornings lately sitting out here, watching the mist rise off the valley. And I have been thinking about a feeling that many of us in our golden years know all too well. It is the feeling of being powerless. You spend your whole life being the one who makes things happen. You were the one who worked the double shifts. You were the one who fixed the roof. You were the one who built that savings account up to $450,000, dollar by dollar, year by year. You were the engine of your family. But then, retirement comes. Your body starts to slow down. Your children are grown, and they are making their own choices, even the ones that break your heart. And suddenly, you feel small. You feel like you are just a spectator in your own life. I remember feeling that exact way during the height of the crisis with Sarah and David. I would go into my bedroom. I would kneel by the bed, and I would pray with everything I had. I would say, "Lord, please, send your power into this situation. Fix David's business. Save my daughter's peace of mind. Give me the strength to handle this." I was begging for the fire of God's power to fall on my family, but nothing seemed to happen. The heavens felt like brass. I felt more powerless than ever. And then, one quiet night, while Martha was already asleep, I felt the Spirit whisper a question to my heart. He asked me, "Where is the fuel?" I didn't understand at first. I thought, "Fuel? I am praying. Isn't that enough?" But I went back to the scriptures, back to those ancient altars we have been talking about, and I saw a pattern. In the Bible, whenever fire fell from heaven, it never fell on an empty altar. The fire only fell when there was a sacrifice laid out. The sacrifice was the fuel for the power. I realized that I was asking God for the fire of His help, but I was refusing to provide the wood of my surrender. I wanted God to use His power to make my plans work. I wanted Him to be the assistant to my own will. I was still clutching those $450,000. I was still clutching my need to be the boss. My altar was empty because I was still holding everything in my own hands. Listen to me, my friend. If you feel powerless today, it might be because you are trying to manufacture your own strength. You are trying to use your own wisdom, your own money, and your own influence to keep your world from falling apart. And you are exhausted. True spiritual power, the kind of power that actually changes hearts and restores families, does not come to people who are strong. It comes to people who have finally admitted they are weak. It comes to the person who lays their life on the altar and says, "I cannot do this. I give up my right to run this show. I am the fuel." I had to take those $450,000 and the legal documents Mr. Miller had prepared, and the pride I had as a father, and I had to pile them up on the altar. I had to offer them up as fuel. And you know what happened? The moment I truly stopped trying to be the power of God began to move. It didn't look like a lightning bolt. It looked like a deep, unshakable peace. It looked like the ability to walk into a room with David and not feel the need to criticize him. It looked like the strength to trust that Sarah was in God's hands, even if her bank account was empty. We often think that surrender is a sign of weakness, but in the kingdom of God, surrender is the secret to power. When you empty your hands, you finally have the capacity to receive His strength. If you are tired of being tired, stop asking for the fire. While you are still hiding the wood, lay it all down. Give Him the very thing you are afraid to lose. Give Him your reputation, your control, and yes, even your bank account. Let your surrender be the fuel, and I promise you, the fire will fall. And when it does, you will find a power that you could never, ever create on your own. There is a beautiful thing that happens when you have been on the altar for a while. Your eyes start to change. You start to see things from a different height. I call this the new perspective. For the longest time, my perspective was dominated by one thing: loss. Every time I thought about Sarah and David's financial struggle, I saw it through the lens of what I was losing. I was losing my security. I was losing the $450,000 I had worked 35 years to save. I was losing the dream retirement that Martha and I had talked about for decades. When you are focused on what you are losing, you are always in a state of grief and anger. You are always looking backward. You are always counting the cost. But as I stayed on that altar, as I let the fire burn away my ownership, I started to look up. I stopped looking at what I was giving up, and I started looking at what I was becoming. I remember sitting on the porch with Martha, sipping some lemonade. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Normally, I would have been inside, pacing the floor, worrying about the bills David had mentioned. But instead, I was just there. I was present. I was watching the birds. I was listening to Martha tell a story about her garden. I realized that I was becoming a different kind of man. I was no longer a manager of a family. I was becoming a father again. I was no longer a guardian of a bank account. I was becoming a child of God. This is the great exchange we talked about. I was trading my limited, stressed out strength for his infinite power. I was trading my narrow, fearful perspective for his wide, eternal one. From the altar, I could finally see Sarah and David clearly. I stopped seeing them as problems to be solved or investments to be protected. I started seeing them as precious souls who were on their own journey with the Lord. I realized that if I kept them safe with my money, I might actually be stealing from them the opportunity to see God's provision for themselves. My $450,000 were not just savings. They were a veil that was keeping me from seeing the face of God. Once I put them on the altar, the veil was torn. I remember one night, David came over to help me move some boxes in the garage. Usually, I would have used that time to give him a lecture disguised as advice. I would have been thinking about the money the whole time. But that night, I didn't think about the money once. I just looked at him. I saw his tired eyes. I saw his good heart. I saw the man he was trying to be. And for the first time in years, I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated love for him. Not because he was doing things my way, but because he was my son-in-law, and he was doing his best. That is the gift of the altar. It clears the smoke of the ego so you can see the beauty of the people around you. The world tells us that we are defined by what we have. It tells us that our value is tied to our net worth. But when you are on the altar, you realize that your value is tied to your source. You are not what you have. You are who you belong to. I looked at Martha and I said, "Honey, we are not losing anything. Even if we end up with $0 in that account, we have gained everything. We have gained our family back. We have gained our peace back. We have gained our souls back." If you are standing at the edge of the altar today, and you are afraid of the loss, I want to encourage you. Stop looking at the sacrifice. Start looking at the Savior. Stop counting what is leaving your hands, and start noticing what is entering your heart. Giving up your life to God is not a sacrifice of loss. It is a sacrifice of exchange. You are trading your anxiety for His peace. You are trading your confusion for His wisdom. You are trading your $450,000 for the riches of His grace. And let me tell you, it is the best deal you will ever make. From up here, on the altar, the view is absolutely beautiful. You are no longer a slave to your stuff. You are a son. You are a daughter. And you are finally free. I want to take a moment and just sit here with you in the quiet. Have you ever thought about the word exchange? In our world, an exchange is usually a transaction. You go to the store, you give them some of your hard-earned money, and they give you a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. It is a fair trade. You give something of value, and you get something of value back. But what happens at the altar is not a fair trade. It is what I have come to call the great exchange. You see, when I was sitting in my study, looking at those bank statements for our $450,000, I thought I was making a deal. I thought I was telling God, "Okay, I will give you a little bit of my trust, if you give me a little bit of insurance that Sarah and David will be okay." But that is not how it works. The great exchange is when you bring your absolute mess, and He gives you His absolute mercy. I started to realize that I was bringing God a very limited, very shaky kind of security. My $450,000 was finite. It could be spent. It could be lost in a market crash. It could be stolen. It was a small, flickering candle in a very large and dark world. And in exchange for that flickering candle, God was offering me the sun. I looked at the situation with Sarah and David. My mind was full of confusion. I was constantly running the numbers. I was trying to figure out how many months they could last if I gave them $10,000 now, and maybe $5,000 later. My wisdom was so small. It was just a collection of what ifs and maybe I shoulds. But at the altar, I handed that confusion over to him. I said, Lord, I am bringing you my limited, tired, and broken thinking. And you know what he gave me back? He gave me his wisdom. It did not come all at once. It came as a quiet knowing. It came as a sense of when to speak and when to stay silent. It came as a peace that did not make sense according to the math in my checkbook. I was trading my limited strength for his infinite power. I remember talking to Martha about this one evening while we were sitting in the garden. I told her, Martha, I have spent 35 years trying to be the provider. I have spent 35 years thinking that the weight of our family's future was on my shoulders. I have been trying to provide for everyone out of my own little well of $450,000. But that well can run dry. The great exchange is when you stop trusting in the well, and you start trusting in the rainmaker. I was giving him my finite, and he was giving me his infinite. I was giving him my brokenness, and he was giving me his wholeness. Think about your own life. What are you holding on to that is limited? Maybe it is your health. Maybe it is your influence in your community. Maybe it is a pile of money that you think is your only hope for the future. When you put those things on the altar, you are not losing them. You are trading up. You are trading your ability to manage your life for God's ability to rule the universe. I realized that if I kept my $450,000 in my own hands, I only had $450,000. But if I put them in God's hands, I had the creator of the universe as my provider. The math changed. The fear vanished. I look at David now, and I don't see a financial problem anymore. I see a young man who is being taught by the same God who taught me. I traded my meddling for God's moving. It is the most lopsided trade in history. We give him our sins. He gives us his righteousness. We give him our anxiety. He gives us his rest. We give him ourself, and he gives us himself. Do not be afraid to make the trade. Do not hold on to your limited scraps when the king is offering you the keys to the kingdom. Lay it down. Make the exchange. And then, just breathe. You are no longer living on your own resources. You are living on his. And let me tell you, his resources, they never, ever run out. Now, I would be lying to you if I told you that the altar was a comfortable place. It is not. Freedom is a beautiful thing, but it comes with a very high price. I call it the cost of freedom. In our country, we talk a lot about freedom, but usually, we mean the freedom to do whatever we want, the freedom to be the boss, the freedom to have it our way. But the freedom I found at the altar was different. It was the freedom from myself. And that is the most expensive kind of freedom there is. What did it cost me? First, it cost me the right to be right. You have to understand. I am a man who likes to be right. I have lived 72 years, and I have learned a lot. I felt like I had earned the right to tell Sarah and David exactly how to live their lives. I felt like I had earned the right to be the judge. To put that on the altar meant I had to give up my lectures. I had to give up that feeling of superiority I felt when I looked at David's mistakes. It is very expensive to give up your pride. It feels like a part of your skin is being peeled away. Second, it cost me my comfort. I was comfortable when I had everything planned out with Mr. Miller. I was comfortable when I felt like those $450,000 were behind a legal wall that nobody could touch. It was a false comfort, a fake security, but it felt good. Surrender took me out of that comfort zone. It put me in a place where I had to actually trust God every single day. I couldn't just look at a bank balance and feel okay. I had to look at the cross and feel okay. That is a much more vulnerable place to be. Third, and this was the hardest part, it cost me the right to control others. I realized that my worry for Sarah was actually a form of control. I was using my anxiety as a way to stay involved in things that were none of my business. I was using those $450,000 as a hook to keep them close to me, to make them listen to me, to make them respect me, to be truly free. I had to let them go. I had to pay the price of my own importance. I remember one afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, and Sarah was over. She was talking about a decision they were making, and every bone in my body wanted to interrupt her. I wanted to tell her why she was wrong. I wanted to tell her what I would do with the money instead. But I felt the Holy Spirit whisper, "Stay on the altar." I stayed silent. I just listened. I just loved her. And you know what happened? In that silence, I felt a freedom I had never known. I didn't have to carry the weight of her decision. I didn't have to be the savior of her family. I was free from the burden of being God in her life. It cost me my ego, but it gave me my daughter back. We often fear the altar because we see the cost. We see the things we have to leave behind. We see the reputation we might lose. We see the comfort that is being burned away. But we forget to look at what we are buying with that cost. We are buying a version of ourselves that can finally sleep at night. We are buying a version of ourselves that can love people without needing anything from them. We are buying a version of ourselves that is no longer a slave to fear. I looked at Martha, and I told her, "Honey, this is the most expensive thing I have ever done. It has cost me my pride, my plans, and my $450,000 of security." She smiled at me, that beautiful, knowing smile, and she said, "Yes, but look at how much you can breathe now." And she was right. Freedom is expensive, but it is worth every penny. The world will tell you to find yourself. But Jesus says you have to lose yourself to find out who you really are. You have to lose the boss. You have to lose the owner. You have to lose the hero. Once you pay that price at the altar, you walk away with a treasure that no bank account can ever hold. You walk away with the freedom of a child of God. And that, my friend, is a bargain at any price. So, I ask you today, what are you afraid to pay? What are you holding on to because you think the cost of letting go is too high? I am telling you, as someone who has stood there in the heat of the fire, the cost of holding on is much, much higher. Holding on costs you your peace. Holding on costs you your joy. Holding on costs you your soul. Pay the price. Lay it down and step into the wide, open, beautiful freedom of the altar. You know, we live in a world that is obsessed with the idea of finding yourself. You see it on the covers of magazines. You hear it in the movies. And you even see it on social media. They tell you that you need to go on a journey. Maybe travel the world. Or buy a new house. Or change your career. All so you can find the real you. But after 72 years on this earth, I have realized that the world has it completely backwards. For most of my life, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the man who worked 35 years at the same firm. I was the man who never missed a mortgage payment. I was the man with $450,000 in the bank. A respectable father and a pillar of the community. That was my identity. That was myself. But as I stood at the altar, as I began to let the fire burn away my control over that money and my control over Sarah and David, I felt like I was disappearing. I felt like the walls of my life were falling. And it was terrifying. I remember looking in the bathroom mirror one morning, and I actually asked the reflection, "Who are you? If I am not the provider, then who am I? If I am not the boss of this family, then what is my purpose? If I do not have the safety of those $450,000 to lean on, then what do I have left?" It was in that moment of total emptiness that I finally understood the words of Jesus. He said, "Whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it." Think about that paradox. You have to lose your life to find it. I realized that the version of me I had been protecting for 70 years was not my true self at all. It was a mask. It was a version of me built out of fear and pride and the need for security. The me that was obsessed with the bank account was a prisoner to that bank account. The me that needed to be the hero for Sarah was a slave to her approval. When I finally let those things die at the altar, the person who was left was, well, he was a child of God. I found a self that didn't need $450,000 to feel significant. I found a self that didn't need to be right all the time to feel valuable. I found a self that was finally free to love without strings and to give without fear. I remember sitting on the back porch with David. Normally, I would have been thinking about how to fix him, which really meant making him more like me. But that night, I just felt this deep, quiet joy. I realized that I didn't need him to be anything for me to be happy. My happiness was no longer tied to his success or failure. It was tied to my Father in heaven. I told Martha, "Honey, I feel like a weight has been lifted that I didn't even know I was carrying. I spent decades building a statue of myself, and I was exhausted from trying to keep it from tipping over. Now, the statue is gone. It was burned up at the altar, and what is left is just me. Just a man, just a husband, just a follower of Christ. The world tells you to find yourself by adding more things to your life. More money, more status, more power. But the altar tells you that you find yourself by subtracting. You find the diamond by chipping away all the stone. You find the true you by letting the fire consume the fake you. I am not the $450,000. I am not the legal wall. I am not the hero. I am a living sacrifice. And in that surrender, I have found a version of myself that is more alive, more peaceful, and more joyful than I ever thought possible. The old man is gone. The new man is here. And let me tell you, he is a lot more fun to be around. So, do not be afraid of the loss at the altar. You aren't losing anything that was truly yours to begin with. You are only losing the chains that were keeping you from the person you were always meant to be. Step into the fire, let it burn, and wait for the true you to rise from the ashes. We have come a long way together, haven't we? We have talked about the ancient stones, the fire, the $450,000, and the struggle of the Monday afternoon. And now, we come to the most important truth of all. Many people look at the altar and they see an end. They see a place of death. They see a place where things are lost and lives are surrendered. And they stay away because they are afraid of the finish line. But I want to tell you, from the bottom of my heart, that the altar is not an end. It is a beginning. It is not a grave. It is a doorway. As I look back on this journey, I realize that my life didn't end when I laid down my pride and my bank account. My life actually started. Before the altar, I was just surviving. I was managing my stress. I was protecting my assets. I was trying to hold back the tide of old age and uncertainty with my own two hands. It was a small, cramped, anxious way to live. I was 72 years old, but I was living like a man who was already buried under his own worries. But on the other side of that sacrifice, there is a new world. I call it the resurrection life. You see, God does not ask you to die just for the sake of dying. He asks you to die so that he can raise you up into something better. He asks you to empty your hands so that he can fill them with things that never rot or fade away. I think about my family now. The situation with Sarah and David didn't magically become perfect overnight. David still has work to do. They still have bills. But everything is different because my heart is different. The $450,000 are no longer a wall between us. They are a resource for God to use as he sees fit. I am at peace. Sarah is at peace. And in that peace, we have found a love that is deeper than anything we had before. I see the world through the eyes of a man who has already surrendered everything, and therefore has nothing left to fear. What can the world do to me now? It cannot take my money, because I already gave it to God. It cannot take my reputation, because I already laid it on the altar. It cannot take my future, because it is already in the hands of the King. That, my friend, is what true life looks like. It is the life of the free. The altar is the doorway to a version of your old age that is ruck-rur, bright, and full of hope. You don't have to spend your golden years clutching your savings and worrying about the news. You can spend them in the presence of the one who loves you. You can spend them being a vessel of grace for your children and your grandchildren. I want to invite you, right now, to stop standing on the outside of the doorway. I know the fire looks hot. I know the cost feels high. I know those $450,000, or whatever it is you are holding on to, feel like your only hope. But I promise you, they are not. They are just the fuel for a fire that will bring you into the most beautiful season of your life. Do not bring God your to-do list anymore. Do not bring him your legal walls or your plans to fix everyone around you. Bring him your life. Lay it down. Lay down the worry. Lay down the control. Lay down the old you. Let the fire consume what does not belong. And then, wait. Watch as the life of God raises you up. Watch as he gives you a peace that you could never manufacture on your own. Watch as he restores the years that the locusts have eaten. The altar is the doorway to true life, and the door is open. Thank you for walking this path with me. I hope my story, and the story of Martha, and Sarah, and even Mr. Miller, has encouraged you to trust the shepherd. He is good, his fire is kind, and his altar. It is the place where you finally, truly, start to live. I will see you in the next one. God bless you. Well, we have spent a good amount of time together today, haven't we? I am so glad you stayed with me until the very end. As the sun finally sets here on this porch, and the air gets a little cooler, I find myself taking a very deep breath. It is a breath of gratitude. I think back to where I was just a few months ago. I was a man who was possessed by his possessions. I was a man who thought that $450,000 and a few legal walls built by Mr. Miller were the only things keeping my world from falling apart. I was tired. I was angry. And I was very, very alone, even when I was in a room full of people. But today, as I look at Martha through the screen door, and I think about the phone call I had with Sarah and David this morning, everything feels different. The money is still there, but it is no longer my master. My pride is mostly gone, burned away by a fire that I used to fear. But now, I welcome. I want to leave you with one final thought. If you are sitting there today, clutching your own version of those $450,000, or maybe you are clutching a grudge, or a fear about your health, or a need to control your grown children, please, listen to an old man who has been through the fire. It is okay to let go. It is safe to trust him. The altar is not a place of punishment. It is the place where you trade your heavy, dusty, old life for a life that is light and eternal. It is the place where you finally stop being the hero, so you can finally be the son or the daughter. I want to remind you once more that while this story was a narrative illustration meant to bring these truths to life, the peace that comes from surrender is very real. It is a peace that passes all understanding. If this message touched your heart today, or if it reminded you of something you need to lay down, please, leave a comment below. I truly love hearing from you. It feels like we are all sitting on this porch together, sharing our lives and our wisdom. Tell me your story. Tell me what you are trusting God with today. And if you found comfort in these words, I would be so honored if you would subscribe to our channel and share this video with a friend or a family member who might be struggling. We are all just walking each other home, aren't we? And it is much easier to walk when your hands are empty and your heart is full. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me. It is a gift I do not take for granted. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you his deep, beautiful peace. We will see you in the next one. God bless you, and God bless your home.